I can still hear his words echoing through that hotel door. She thinks she doesn't know anything. My own son-in-law laughing about me as I stood outside my daughter's wedding suite. The blue dress I'd sewn by hand crumpled in my trembling fingers. For 800 miles, I'd driven with hope in my heart, only to have a door slammed in my face by my only child. But what they don't realize is that mothers hear everything, every whisper, every secret. I caught fragments that chilled my blood, talk of hidden wills, mysterious letters, and a past that someone has rewritten without my consent. Now I'm piecing together the shattered fragments of a life I thought I knew, uncovering a web of lies that stretches back decades. What did my late husband hide from me? Why has my daughter erased me from her life? And most terrifying of all, what if the greatest deception is the one I've told myself? Follow along on this heartbreaking journey of a mother fighting for the truth about her family. If you've ever felt betrayed by those closest to you, this story will shake you to your core. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from to join me as I uncover the devastating secrets that lie behind closed doors. I can still remember the sound of that door. It wasn't just the dry thud of wood against frame, but the silence that followed, as if it had expelled me not only from the house, but from my own daughter's life. My name is Margaret Williams, and at 63 years old, I never thought I'd be standing outside a hotel room, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, listening to whispers about me through a closed door. I had driven 800 miles alone from my small home in Traverse City, Michigan, my arthritic fingers gripping the steering wheel until they cramped. In the passenger seat lay a dress I'd sewn in secret during countless sleepless nights, a powder blue silk that reminded me of the color my Eliza wore on her 5th birthday. I wanted to look beautiful for her special day, her wedding day, a day I wasn't invited to. She thinks she doesn't know anything. I heard my son-in-law's voice through the door, followed by hushed laughter that cut deeper than any knife ever could. The journey had been grueling. I stopped only for gas and to stretch my legs that aren't what they used to be. 3 days on the road, following highway signs toward Charlotte, with nothing but old cassette tapes and memories to keep me company. I kept rehearsing what I'd say when I saw her, how I'd hold my chin high despite the humiliation of having to invite myself to my only daughter's wedding. When I finally arrived at the Harborview Hotel, my hands trembled as I applied a fresh coat of lipstick in the rearview mirror. The parking attendant gave me a sympathetic smile. Did he somehow know I was an unwelcome guest? I smoothed down my dress and clutched my small beaded handbag, the one Frank had given me on our 25th anniversary, before cancer took him 3 years later. Room 418. I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, listening to the muffled sounds of celebration inside. When I finally knocked, the voices went silent. "Who is it?" My son-in-law Richard's voice, suddenly tense. "It's Margaret," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "Eliza's mother." There was a hurried, shuffling, urgent whispers. I pressed my ear against the cool wood of the door, catching fragments that made my blood run cold. "Told you she might. Doesn't know about. Keep her away from." Then Richard's voice crystal clear. "She doesn't know anything." The door opened just enough for my daughter's face to appear. My beautiful Eliza, with her father's eyes and my stubborn chin. She was already in her wedding dress, ivory lace that cascaded like a waterfall. She looked stunning and completely horrified to see me. "Mom?" Her voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" The hallway suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. I clutched my handbag tighter. "I heard about the wedding from Cousin Jenny," I said, forcing a smile. I couldn't miss my only daughter's special day, could I? Eliza's eyes darted behind her, seeking guidance from someone I couldn't see. When she looked back at me, her expression had hardened into something I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know you were coming." Those words, rehearsed, distant, cold, pierced my heart like ice. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Richard's smug face, my sister-in-law Sharon's calculating eyes, and several other relatives who had apparently received invitations while I was deliberately excluded. "Can I come in?" I asked. hearing the desperation in my voice. "I've driven so far." "Now's not a good time," Eliza said, already closing the door. "We're just about to leave for the ceremony. Maybe tomorrow we can—" The door closed before she finished her sentence, not with a slam, but with a gentle click that somehow hurt even more, as if I wasn't even worth the drama of a proper rejection. I stood frozen, my ear still pressed against the door, hearing everything they didn't want me to hear. "God, that was close," Richard muttered. "Is she gone?" Sharon asked. "She can't find out about the will," someone said. "Not now." "Or the letters," another voice added. Letters? Will? My mind raced, trying to make sense of these fragments. "She thinks she doesn't know anything," Richard repeated, followed by a round of nervous laughter. I backed away from the door, my legs suddenly unsteady. The dress I'd spent weeks sewing suddenly felt tight around my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I stumbled toward the elevator, barely registering the curious glances from other hotel guests. In that moment, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of the hotel hallway, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to crash this wedding. I was going to uncover whatever they were hiding from me, whatever was worth erasing a mother from her daughter's most important day. They thought I didn't know anything. They were about to discover how wrong they were, because behind every discarded mother is a woman with nothing left to lose. And as I walked through that hotel lobby, my heart hardened with each step. This wasn't just about a wedding invitation anymore. This was about secrets, lies, and a family conspiracy I was determined to unravel, even if it destroyed us all. The road stretched endlessly before me, a gray ribbon winding through the autumn-painted mountains of Virginia. I'd fled the Harbor View Hotel, with tears blurring my vision, my hands shaking so badly I could barely start my old Buick. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid, eating away at the memories I'd cherished for decades. 800 miles. I'd driven 800 miles for a door slammed in my face. The next morning, I found myself parked at a scenic overlook somewhere near the Virginia-North Carolina border. My eyes were swollen from crying all night in a roadside motel that smelled of cigarettes and broken dreams. I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch, my mind replaying those whispered words over and over. She doesn't know anything. What didn't I know? What secret was so terrible that my own daughter would erase me from her wedding day to keep it hidden? I reached across to the passenger seat where my powder blue dress lay crumpled. I'd sewn it with such hope, such foolish anticipation. Each stitch had been a prayer that somehow the distance between Eliza and me could be mended. I'd chosen the fabric because it matched the color of the lake near our old summer cottage in Michigan, the place where Eliza had been happiest as a child before everything changed, before Frank got sick, before the arguments and the silences that grew like weeds between us. "She'll smile," I whispered to myself, smoothing the wrinkled silk with trembling fingers. "She has to smile." But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I'd only learned about the wedding by accident 3 weeks earlier. I'd been at my niece Jenny's baby shower when I overheard her whispering to another cousin. "So sad Margaret won't be at Eliza's wedding," Jenny had said, not realizing I was just around the corner, arranging onesies into a decorative display. "After everything that happened, I guess it makes sense." I'd frozen, the tiny blue onesie clutched in my hand as my world tilted sideways. My daughter was getting married, and I hadn't been told. When I stepped into view, Jenny's face had drained of color. She'd stammered something about assumptions and misunderstandings, but the pity in her eyes told me everything. Everyone knew except me. Everyone had been invited except me. Now sitting at that overlook with the Blue Ridge Mountains spread before me like a painting I couldn't appreciate, I made a decision. I wasn't going home. Not yet. I pulled out the crumpled invitation I'd found in Jenny's purse when she wasn't looking. The elegant cream cardstock with silver lettering announcing the union of Eliza Margaret Williams and Richard James Cooper at St. Augustine's Chapel in Charlotte, North Carolina. September 18th. Today. My GPS said I was still 4 hours away. If I drove straight through, I could make it before the ceremony ended, before my daughter became someone else's family entirely. The drive was a blur of small towns and truck stops. I stopped only once, at a gas station where the attendant, a woman about my age with kind eyes, looked at me with concern. "You all right, honey?" she'd asked, handing me my change. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied, though my reflection in the bathroom mirror had told a different story. My carefully applied makeup was smudged, my silver-streaked hair falling from its pins. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman coming undone. Back on the highway, memories ambushed me at every mile marker. Eliza learning to ride a bike, her little face determined despite the scrapes on her knees. Eliza at 16, slamming doors and screaming that I didn't understand her. Eliza at her father's funeral, standing apart from me, as if grief had carved a canyon between us that could never be crossed. What had I done to deserve this complete excision from her life? What could justify cutting out the woman who had carried her for 9 months, who had sung her to sleep through fevers and nightmares, who had loved her, even when love felt impossible? As Charlotte's skyline appeared on the horizon, I remembered something that sent a chill through me. Last Thanksgiving, the last time I'd seen Eliza, she'd been different. Distant, yes, but also nervous. She'd stepped away to take phone calls multiple times. And when I'd mentioned Frank's old pocket watch, wondering aloud where it had disappeared to, she'd nearly dropped her wine glass. "Why would I know anything about Dad's watch?" she'd snapped too quickly, too defensively. Later that same evening, I'd overheard her arguing with someone on the phone in hushed, urgent tones. "She doesn't suspect anything," she'd said. "Just leave it alone." At the time, I'd assumed she was talking about a surprise Christmas gift. Now those words took on a more sinister meaning. Every road sign bringing me closer to Charlotte seemed to whisper warnings. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And somehow, I was at the center of it, even as I was being pushed to the periphery of my own family. The blue dress beside me was no longer just a garment. It was armor for a battle I hadn't known I was fighting. A battle for truth, for my place in my daughter's life, for whatever they were so desperate to hide from me. "She doesn't know anything," my son-in-law had said. As I crossed into North Carolina, my grief hardened into something sharper, more dangerous. Determination. I was going to find out everything. I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of Charlotte, a faded place with peeling wallpaper and a neon sign missing the letter E. The bored clerk barely looked up as he handed me a key, attached to a plastic numbered tag. Room 7. The irony wasn't lost on me. 7 had been Frank's lucky number. Once inside, I placed my suitcase on the bed with the faded floral comforter and unzipped it slowly. Beneath the hastily packed clothes and toiletries lay a wooden box about the size of a small jewelry case. I hadn't opened it in years, not properly. It was too painful. But now, sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress in this anonymous room, I felt compelled to face what was inside. The box was made of cherry wood, hand-carved by Frank during our first year of marriage. The lid featured an intricate pattern of intertwined roses, his tribute to my maiden name, Rose. I ran my fingertips over the familiar grooves, feeling the memories rise like ghosts from the polished surface. "This will be our treasure chest," Frank had said when he presented it to me on our first anniversary. "For the small treasures that make a life worth living." I opened it slowly as if something might escape. The hinges creaked softly, protesting after years of neglect. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay the physical fragments of my life. A lock of Eliza's baby hair, tied with a tiny blue ribbon, the hospital bracelet from when she was born, a pressed daisy from our first date, Frank's wedding band, which I'd removed from his finger at the funeral home because I couldn't bear the thought of it being buried with him. And beneath these treasures, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, a photograph. I unwrapped it carefully, though I knew exactly what it contained. Eliza, at 10 years old, gap-toothed and freckled, sitting beside me on a rickety Ferris wheel at the county fair. We were both laughing, our faces illuminated by the golden hour sunlight. It was the last summer before everything changed, before I made the mistake that would eventually drive her away. "We were happy once," I whispered to the empty room, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. We were a family, but the box held one more item, tucked into a secret compartment in the bottom that only I knew about. A letter I had written to Frank 5 years ago, shortly before he died. A confession he never read. A truth I had never shared with anyone. I slid my fingernail along the edge of the hidden panel, revealing the cream-colored envelope beneath. The seal was still intact. The words, "For Frank, only when you're ready," written in my neat penmanship across the front. I had planned to give it to him when he was stronger, when the cancer had retreated enough for him to handle what I needed to say. But that day never came. My hands trembled as I held the envelope up to the dim motel light. Inside was the secret I had carried for over 30 years. A secret that, if revealed, could explain why my daughter had cut me out of her life. Could this be what they were hiding from me? Had someone found the letter after Frank's death? Had Eliza somehow discovered what I had done? The thought sent ice through my veins. I quickly returned the letter to its hiding place and closed the box with a decisive snap. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face that particular ghost. As I placed the wooden box back in my suitcase, my phone rang. The sound was so unexpected in the stillness of the room that I nearly dropped the box. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, with a Charlotte area code. "Hello?" I answered, my voice unsteady. "Margaret? Is that you?" The voice was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Yes, who's this?" "It's Helen. Helen Bradshaw." The name hit me like a physical blow. Helen Bradshaw had been my closest friend during the years Frank and I lived in Charlotte, before we moved to Michigan for his job. We had drifted apart after the move, our friendship reduced to Christmas cards and occasional phone calls that grew more infrequent with each passing year. "Helen, how did you know I was here?" There was a pause, heavy with something I couldn't identify. "Jenny called me, said you might be coming down for the wedding and that you might need a friend." The hesitation in her voice told me there was more to the story. Jenny hadn't just called out of concern for her aging aunt. There was something Helen knew, something everyone seemed to know except me. "I wasn't invited," I said flatly. "My own daughter is getting married, and I found out by accident." Helen's sigh carried through the phone line, laden with pity. "Oh, Margaret, there's so much you don't know." Those words again. The same implication that had followed me from Michigan to North Carolina, that I was in the dark about something crucial, something that everyone else was privy to. "Then tell me," I demanded, anger suddenly flaring hot and bright. "What is it that everyone's hiding from me? What could possibly justify cutting a mother out of her daughter's wedding?" The silence stretched between us like a live wire. When Helen finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not my place to tell you, Margaret, but I think you should leave Charlotte. Go home. Some things are better left buried." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone in my hand, then at the wooden box peeking out from my suitcase. Helen's warning echoed in my ears, mingling with the fragments of conversation I'd overheard through the hotel door. "She doesn't know anything. She can't find out about the will, or the letters. Whatever they were hiding, it was connected to Frank, to our past in Charlotte, to the secret I had kept locked away in that wooden box for 5 long years." I glanced at the clock. 3:45 p.m. The wedding was scheduled for 5 as. I had just enough time to make it to St. Augustine's Chapel. Some things are better left buried, Helen had said, but I'd spent too many years living with ghosts to turn back now. The evening air had turned cool by the time I pulled into the parking lot of Mabel's Diner, a small roadside establishment about 15 miles outside of Charlotte. I needed to collect myself before heading to the chapel, and my stomach was knotted with hunger after barely eating for 2 days. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly pink glow over the half-empty parking lot. A bell jingled cheerfully as I pushed open the door, the sound at odds with the heaviness in my chest. The interior was straight out of the 1970s. Vinyl booths in faded turquoise, speckled Formica tabletops, and walls decorated with old license plates and black and white photographs of Charlotte from decades past. I slid into a booth near the back, away from the windows. The last thing I needed was to be spotted by one of Eliza's wedding guests. A waitress with tired eyes and bottle blonde hair approached, notepad in hand. Her name tag read Doris, and something about her weathered face reminded me of my own mother. "What can I get you, honey?" she asked, her accent thick with the South I'd left behind years ago. "Just coffee, please, and maybe a slice of pie." My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. She nodded and shuffled away, returning moments later with a steaming mug and a generous slice of peach pie that I knew I wouldn't be able to eat. I thanked her anyway, wrapping my cold fingers around the warm ceramic mug, hoping to absorb some comfort from its heat. That's when I saw her. A woman in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon, wearing a navy dress with a corsage pinned to her shoulder. She was paying her bill at the counter, but there was no mistaking her profile. Barbara Johnson, my former neighbor from the years we'd lived in Charlotte. The woman who had lived across the street from us during the darkest period of my life. My breath caught in my throat. Barbara had been more than a neighbor. She'd been a confidant during those turbulent years. She knew things about our family that no one else did, things I'd worked hard to forget. And now here she was, clearly dressed for a wedding, my daughter's wedding. I shrank back in my booth, hoping she wouldn't notice me, but it was too late. Her eyes swept the diner and locked with mine. I watched a series of emotions cross her face: surprise, discomfort, and finally, something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. After a moment's hesitation, she made her way to my table, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. "Margaret," she said, as if she couldn't quite believe her eyes. "Margaret Williams." I forced a smile. "Hello, Barbara. It's been a long time." She glanced nervously at the empty seat across from me, clearly debating whether to sit down. Politeness won out, and she slid into the booth, setting her purse on the table between us like a barrier. "What are you doing in Charlotte?" she asked, though the corsage on her dress and the tension in her voice told me she already knew. "I came for the wedding," I said simply, watching her face. Barbara flinched, her fingers fidgeting with her pearl necklace. "I see." A pause. "I didn't realize you were expected." The way she emphasized the last word confirmed what I already knew. My exclusion had been deliberate and widely known. "I wasn't invited," I admitted, the words scraping my throat like broken glass. But I couldn't miss my only daughter's wedding day. Barbara's eyes darted to the diner door, as if looking for an escape route. "Margaret, I don't think that's a good idea. After everything that's happened." "What has happened, Barbara?" I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten. "Everyone keeps alluding to something I don't know about. What exactly am I being blamed for?" Her face paled. "You really don't know, do you?" Those words again. The same phrase that had haunted me all the way from Michigan. I shook my head slowly. "That's what I'm trying to understand." Barbara glanced at her watch, then back at me, indecision written across her features. Finally, she sighed. "It's not my place to tell you. But Margaret, if you value your relationship with Eliza at all, what's left of it? You won't go to that church today." Anger flared in my chest, hot and sudden. "She's my daughter, and she has her reasons," Barbara countered, her voice dropping to a whisper. Things came to light after Frank passed. Things about what really happened back then. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "What things?" But Barbara was already sliding out of the booth, gathering her purse with trembling hands. "I've said too much. I'm sorry, Margaret, truly sorry." She paused, then added with devastating finality, "Some secrets should stay buried." With that, she hurried out of the diner, the bell jingling in her wake. I sat frozen, the pie untouched, the coffee cooling in front of me. Barbara's words echoed in my mind, joining the chorus of cryptic warnings I'd received since learning about the wedding. What had come to light after Frank's death? What did they think they knew about what really happened back then? My mind raced through possibilities, each more terrible than the last. The wooden box in my motel room seemed to call to me across the miles, the letter inside a ticking bomb I'd never had the courage to detonate. "More coffee, hon?" Doris had returned, coffee pot in hand. I nodded numbly, watching as she refilled my cup. As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Excuse me, what time is it?" She checked her watch. 4:15. 45 minutes until the ceremony began. Just enough time to make it to St. Augustine's Chapel. I left a $20 bill on the table. far too much for coffee and untouched pie, and hurried out to my car. The encounter with Barbara had shaken me to my core, but it had also hardened my resolve. Everyone seemed to think they knew something about me, about my past, about what had really happened. But they were wrong. They had to be, because only I knew the full truth of what was in that letter, the confession I'd never had the chance to make. As I pulled onto the highway toward Charlotte, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of fiery orange and deep purple. It looked like the heavens themselves were burning, a fitting backdrop for the storm I was about to walk into. Whatever they thought they knew, whatever version of the past they were using to justify cutting me out of my daughter's life, I would confront it head on. I would reclaim my place in Eliza's life, even if it meant facing the ghosts I'd tried so hard to outrun. Some secrets should stay buried, Barbara had said. But sometimes the only way forward is to dig up the past and let the truth, however painful, finally see the light of day. I arrived at the Harbor View Hotel just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ornate facade. The wedding party would still be at the chapel, giving me a window of opportunity I couldn't waste. After my encounter with Barbara at the diner, I knew I couldn't simply crash the ceremony. I needed answers first, and my best chance was to return to the scene of my initial rejection. The hotel lobby was a study in understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and plush velvet seating arranged in intimate groupings. I straightened my spine and adopted the confident stride I'd perfected during my years as a high school English teacher. Act like you belong, and most people won't question your presence. The young man at the front desk barely glanced up as I crossed the lobby toward the elevators. I pressed the button for the 4th floor, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing an empty corridor. Room 418, the site of my humiliation just 24 hours earlier, awaited at the end of the hall. I approached cautiously, listening for any sounds from within. Silence. The wedding party was still at the chapel, just as I'd hoped. Now came the tricky part. I'd noticed a housekeeping cart near the ice machine when I stepped off the elevator. With one last glance down the deserted hallway, I made my decision. "Excuse me," I called, approaching a housekeeper who was restocking the cart. "I'm so embarrassed, but my daughter's getting married today, and in all the excitement, I left my medication in her room." "Room 418. I don't suppose you could." The woman, Lucia according to her name tag, looked uncertain. "I'm not supposed to." I fumbled in my purse and pulled out a $20 bill, feeling a twinge of guilt at the deception. "Please, it's my heart medication. I'd ask my daughter, but she's at the chapel, and I don't want to worry her on her special day." Lucia hesitated, then took the money with a discreet nod. "5 minutes," she said, using her master key to unlock the door. "I'll wait right here." "Thank you," I whispered, slipping inside the suite. The room was chaos, the beautiful disorder of a bride's preparation. Makeup scattered across the vanity, garment bags draped over chairs, champagne glasses with lipstick stains lined up on a silver tray. I moved quickly, unsure what I was looking for, but knowing I had precious little time to find it. On the desk by the window sat a leather portfolio embossed with "Wedding of Eliza and Richard." I opened it with trembling hands to find a detailed schedule, seating arrangements, and a guest list. I scanned it quickly, confirming what I already knew. My name was nowhere to be found, but it was a note scrawled in the margin that caught my eye. "Final meeting with J.M., 10 a.m., papers signed." J.M. The initials nagged at me. Who was J.M. and what papers needed signing on the morning of my daughter's wedding? I moved to the closet next, where several hanging bags still contained clothes. I recognized one as belonging to my sister-in-law, Sharon, Frank's sister who had never approved of me. Sharon had always been protective of Frank to the point of possessiveness. After his death, she'd become even more cold toward me, as if I were somehow to blame. A small leather briefcase sat on the closet shelf, partially hidden behind a hat box. Something compelled me to reach for it. The brass lock was open, and I hesitated only briefly before lifting the lid. Inside were stacks of papers, legal documents from the look of them. On top was a folder labeled F. Williams Estate Revised. Frank's estate? Why would these papers be here, in my daughter's wedding suite, 3 years after his death? I pulled out the folder with shaking hands and opened it. The first page was a legal document dated just 6 months ago, with the heading, Amendment to Last Will and Testament. My eyes raced over the dense legal text, catching phrases that made my heart stutter. Evidence of fraudulent behavior, concealment of assets, grounds for contesting original will, and finally, the most devastating line of all, Margaret Rose Williams knowingly and willfully. Ma'am? Lucia's voice called from the doorway. It's been 5 minutes. I quickly slipped the folder back into the briefcase, my mind reeling. Just another moment, I called, my voice unnaturally high. As I prepared to leave, something else caught my eye, a small velvet box on the nightstand. I shouldn't have opened it. Every instinct told me to walk away, but I couldn't stop myself. Inside was Frank's pocket watch, the antique gold timepiece that had belonged to his grandfather, passed down through generations of Williams men. The watch that had mysteriously disappeared after his death. I picked it up with trembling fingers, feeling its familiar weight in my palm. The inscription inside the cover was still there. Time passes, love remains, F&M 1986, our wedding date. Ma'am! Lucia's voice was more insistent now. You must leave. I reluctantly returned the watch to its box and hurried out of the room, mumbling thanks to Lucia as I passed. I made it to the elevator just as the doors were closing, slipping inside next to an elderly couple dressed in formal attire. More wedding guests, no doubt. Wasn't it a beautiful ceremony? The woman said, drying her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. When Richard placed his grandfather's ring on Eliza's finger, I just lost it completely. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Grandfather's ring? Richard had no grandfather's ring. I would have known if he came from a family with such heirlooms. Unless the elevator doors opened, and I stumbled out into the lobby, my mind spinning with terrible possibilities. I needed air. I pushed through the revolving doors and stood on the hotel steps, gulping the cool evening air like a drowning woman. That's when I heard them. Voices approaching, laughing and talking excitedly. The wedding party returning from the chapel. I pressed myself against a pillar, trying to become invisible as they spilled out of limousines and luxury cars, a river of silk and tuxedos flowing toward the hotel entrance. I saw my daughter first, radiant in her ivory gown, her arm linked through Richard's. Then Sharon, her face flushed with champagne and triumph. Various cousins, friends, colleagues, all the people who had been deemed worthy of witnessing my daughter's marriage while I had been deliberately excluded. And then I saw him, an elderly man in an impeccable suit, walking with a silver-headed cane, James Morrison, J.M. Frank's former business partner, the man who had been like a second father to Eliza, the man who, if my suspicions were correct, was helping them rewrite history and Frank's will to cut me out completely. I remained frozen against the pillar until they had all entered the hotel. Then, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, I knew what I had to do. I would return to my motel room, retrieve the wooden box with its hidden letter, and then come back here to confront them all. It was time for the truth, the whole truth, to come out. Whatever they thought they knew about me, about Frank, about what had really happened, they were only seeing pieces of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle I had spent decades trying to solve myself. As I walked to my car, a strange calm settled over me. Let them have their wedding celebration tonight. Tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. I returned to St. Augustine's Chapel the next morning, drawn by an impulse I couldn't fully explain. The grand wedding was over, but I needed to see the place where my daughter had exchanged her vows without me present. The Gothic Revival building stood silent and imposing against the pale blue morning sky, its stained glass windows catching the early sunlight and scattering jewel-toned patterns across the stone steps. A groundskeeper was sweeping up rice and flower petals from the pathway. He nodded politely as I approached, probably assuming I was retrieving something left behind after the celebration. The heavy wooden doors were unlocked and I slipped inside, immediately enveloped by the hushed, reverent atmosphere. The chapel was empty, save for a lone custodian removing wilted flower arrangements from the altar. The air was heavy with the lingering scent of lilies and beeswax candles. I slid into a pew near the back, my legs suddenly unable to support me, as the reality of what I'd missed washed over me in waves of grief. This was where my Eliza had become someone's wife, where she had walked down the aisle on James Morrison's arm instead of mine, because who else would have given her away? Where she had stood before God and family, but not her mother, and pledged her life to Richard Cooper. My fingers traced the smooth, worn wood of the pew, wondering if any of the guests had questioned my absence, or if I had been so thoroughly erased that no one even thought to ask where the mother of the bride might be. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The custodian had noticed me, his voice echoing slightly in the empty chapel. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. He studied me for a moment, then understanding softened his weathered face. "You family?" he asked gently. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could suppress it. "I'm the mother of the bride," I said, my voice cracking on the last word. He looked confused, glancing around as if expecting to find someone else who could explain this strange statement. "The Williams Cooper wedding? Yesterday evening?" I nodded, a hot tear sliding down my cheek. He approached slowly, clutching a half-filled trash bag. "I've been working here 27 years, seen hundreds of weddings. Never seen a mother of the bride miss her daughter's ceremony." He paused, then added kindly, "Must be quite a story there." "It is," I whispered, though I'm still trying to understand it myself. He seemed to sense my need for solitude and retreated to continue his work, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the ghost of the celebration I'd been denied. I closed my eyes, trying to picture the scene. Eliza standing there in her ivory gown, Richard waiting at the altar, the music, the flowers, the expectant hush as she appeared at the back of the chapel. All the moments mothers dream of witnessing from the day their daughters are born. When I opened my eyes again, something caught my attention, a small object glinting in the colored light that streamed through the stained glass windows. It had fallen between the pews, half hidden beneath a forgotten program. I reached down and picked it up, my breath catching in my throat. It was a ring, a man's wedding band, made of thick gold, with an intricate Celtic knot pattern etched around its circumference. I recognized it instantly, though I hadn't seen it in decades. It was identical to Frank's wedding ring, the one I'd removed from his finger before his burial. But Frank's ring was in my wooden box back at the motel. I'd held it just yesterday, felt its weight and familiar contours in my palm. So what was this? A replica. Why would anyone create an exact copy of my husband's wedding band? With trembling fingers, I turned the ring to examine the inside. There, engraved in tiny, elegant script, were the initials I expected. F.W. And beside them, not M.R. for Margaret Rose, as in the original, but another set of initials altogether. C.L. The chapel seemed to spin around me as the implications crashed through my mind like a wrecking ball. C.L. I knew those initials. Cynthia Layton, Frank's research assistant during his time at Charlotte University. The woman I'd always suspected he was too fond of, whose name he'd sometimes murmured in his sleep. The woman who had mysteriously left town shortly after we relocated to Michigan. I clutched the pew in front of me, struggling to breathe as pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving began to fall into place. "Found something?" The custodian had returned, eyeing the ring in my palm. I closed my fingers around it instinctively. "Just a trinket," I lied. "Would it be all right if I took a moment at the altar to say a private prayer for my daughter?" He nodded, gesturing for me to proceed. "Take all the time you need, ma'am. I'll be in the back office when you're done." On legs that felt disconnected from my body, I made my way to the altar where my daughter had stood just hours before. The elaborate flower arrangements framed a large Bible, still open to the passage that had been read during the ceremony. Corinthians, most likely. Love is patient, love is kind. The irony was almost too much to bear. I stood there, the ring burning a hole in my palm, as 30 years of doubts, suspicions, and half-truths crystallized into a single devastating possibility. Frank had had another ring, another life, perhaps even another family. And somehow, my daughter had discovered this, perhaps after his death, and blamed me for knowing, for not knowing, for keeping his secrets. My eye caught something else then, a small velvet box left on the edge of the altar, partially concealed by a spray of white roses. With a sense of inevitability, I opened it. Inside lay Frank's pocket watch, the same one I'd seen in Eliza's hotel room. But now I could examine it properly, and what I found made my knees buckle. The inscription I remembered was there. Time passes, love remains, F&M 1986. But upon closer inspection, I could see that the M had been altered. Examined in the bright light streaming through the stained glass, I could make out the faint outline of a C beneath the M. The watch had never been meant for me. Frank had it engraved for her, for Cynthia, and then had it altered when... What? When he chose me instead? When he was forced to choose me? The possibilities multiplied, each more painful than the last. As I stood there, the weight of these revelations crushing the air from my lungs, I heard voices approaching from the vestibule. One of them I recognized immediately, Richard, my son-in-law, speaking in the same smug tone I'd heard through the hotel door. "It's the final loose end," he was saying. "Once we have the original ring, no one can dispute the amended will." I slipped the duplicate ring into my pocket and placed the watch back exactly as I'd found it, then moved quickly behind a large floral arrangement. From my hiding place, I watched as Richard entered with James Morrison, JM, deep in conversation. "And you're certain Margaret doesn't know?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying clearly in the empty chapel. "She thinks she doesn't know anything," Richard replied with a dismissive laugh. "That's what makes this so perfect." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. Whatever conspiracy they were engaged in, whatever they planned to do with Frank's estate, it all hinged on my ignorance, an ignorance that was rapidly evaporating in the cold light of truth. I fled the chapel before Richard and James Morrison could discover me, slipping out through a side door that led into a small garden. The morning air felt oppressive despite its coolness, as if the weight of what I'd learned was physically pressing down on me. My mind was a tornado of fragmented thoughts, memories suddenly illuminated in a harsh new light. I made it to my car and sat behind the wheel, my whole body trembling so violently I couldn't insert the key into the ignition. The duplicate ring burned in my pocket like a hot coal. I pulled it out, examining it again in the unforgiving morning sunlight. The craftsmanship was identical to Frank's original wedding band, the one nestled in my wooden box back at the motel. Every curve of the Celtic knot pattern, every subtle gradation in the gold's patina. But those initials inside, CL, changed everything. Cynthia Layton. I closed my eyes and her face appeared with perfect clarity, though I hadn't seen her in over 20 years. Tall and elegant, with auburn hair that fell in perfect waves around a heart-shaped face. Intelligence radiating from her green eyes. The way she would laugh at Frank's obscure academic jokes. Her head tilted back to expose the slender column of her throat. The way Frank's eyes would follow her when she left a room. "She's brilliant," he'd say, whenever I questioned their late nights at the university lab. The research would fall apart without her. And I'd believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. Because Frank Williams, respected neurobiologist, devoted husband, doting father, couldn't possibly be living a double life. Could he? With hands that moved as if belonging to someone else, I finally managed to start the car and pull away from St. Augustine's Chapel. I drove aimlessly through Charlotte's tree-lined streets, the city both familiar and foreign after so many years away. Past the university where Frank had taught, past the park where we'd taken Eliza to feed the ducks on Sunday afternoons, past the rows of elegant homes in the neighborhood where we'd once lived. I found myself parking outside a small coffee shop in the Arts District, Maggie's Beans, a place that hadn't existed when we lived here. I needed to think, to process, to plan my next move. The barista gave me a concerned look as I ordered a black coffee, and I realized I must look exactly like what I was, a woman on the verge of collapse. I chose a corner table with my back to the wall, an old habit from my teaching days when I needed to grade papers without distraction. The coffee scalded my tongue, but I barely registered the pain. My mind was too busy reassembling the puzzle of my life with this new, jagged piece forced into the center. Frank had another ring, an original ring, inscribed for another woman. And somehow, years after his death, Eliza had discovered it. But how and why would that turn her against me? Unless she believed I had known all along. Unless she thought I had been complicit in his deception. The memory surfaced without warning. Eliza at 16, standing in our kitchen in Michigan, her face contorted with teenage rage. "You never loved Dad," she'd screamed during one of our increasingly frequent arguments. "You just pretend to be this perfect wife, but it's all fake." I dismissed it as adolescent dramatics at the time. Now I wondered if she'd somehow sensed the fault lines in our marriage, the subtle tensions that had developed during our last years in Charlotte, the suspicions I'd harbored but never confronted, the questions I'd been too afraid to ask. And then there was the letter in my wooden box, my confession to Frank that he'd never read, the truth I'd carried alone for decades. Could that be connected to what was happening now? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the woman approaching my table until her shadow fell across me. I looked up into a face I recognized immediately, though it had been aged by the same 2 decades that had weathered my own. "Hello, Margaret," said Cynthia Layton, as calmly as if we'd arranged to meet for coffee. "I thought that might be you." She was still beautiful, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, those intelligent green eyes now framed by delicate lines. She wore a simple linen dress and carried herself with the same grace I remembered and resented. "May I?" She gestured to the empty chair across from me. I nodded mutely, unable to form words as the living embodiment of my worst fears settled herself across from me, arranging her napkin in her lap with practiced elegance. "I recognized your car," she explained, as if that were the most pressing question between us. "Frank always said you were loyal to a fault, even to that old Buick." The casual mention of my husband's name in her mouth sent a shock through my system. She spoke of him with the easy familiarity of what? A lover? A second wife? "What do you want?" I finally managed, my voice a rasp. Her expression softened almost to pity. "The same thing you do, I imagine. To protect what's mine." The implications of those 4 simple words, "what's mine," threatened to unravel me completely. I gripped my coffee cup so hard I feared it might shatter. "I don't understand what's happening," I admitted, hating the vulnerability in my voice, but unable to maintain any pretense of strength. "My daughter has shut me out of her life. People keep saying I don't know things I should know. I found a ring in the chapel that looks exactly like Frank's wedding band, but with your initials inside. Please," my voice broke. "Please, just tell me what's going on." Cynthia studied me for a long moment, her head tilted slightly as if trying to solve a complex equation. "You really don't know, do you?" she finally said, echoing the refrain I'd been hearing since this nightmare began. But unlike the others, she seemed genuinely surprised by my ignorance. "Know what?" I whispered. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small leather notebook. "Frank kept journals," she said, placing it on the table between us. "Very detailed journals, about his research, about his personal life, about everything." I stared at the notebook, afraid to touch it yet unable to look away. I recognized Frank's handwriting on the cover, the distinctive way he formed his F's with an extra loop at the bottom. After the accident, Cynthia continued, when they were going through his things at the university, they found several of these. Most went to the department archive because of his research notes. But this one, she tapped the notebook. This one was personal, too personal to be made public. James Morrison found it and gave it to me, thinking I should be the one to decide what to do with it. "James Morrison," I repeated, the pieces beginning to align. "Frank's business partner, the man who walked my daughter down the aisle yesterday." Cynthia nodded. "James knew everything, Margaret. About Frank, about us, about what really happened the night of the accident." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "What do you mean, what really happened?" "Frank died of a heart attack." Something flickered across Cynthia's face. Surprise again, or perhaps doubt. "Is that what you believe?" she asked softly. Or is that the story you've told yourself for so long that you've made it true? Before I could respond, she stood, leaving the notebook on the table. Read it, she said. Then find me at the Riverside Hotel, room 237. We have more to discuss. About Eliza, about the estate, about what happens next. She walked away, her linen dress swaying gently around her calves, leaving me alone with a notebook I was suddenly terrified to open, because whatever truth it contained seemed poised to destroy what remained of the life I thought I'd lived. The notebook sat untouched on my motel bed for hours. I'd brought it back from the coffee shop, but couldn't summon the courage to open it. Instead, I paced the small room, stopping occasionally to stare at the leather-bound journal, as if it might suddenly speak and reveal its secrets without me having to read the words. Frank's handwriting on the cover seemed to taunt me. I knew that script intimately, had read his hasty notes on research papers, grocery lists scrawled on the refrigerator whiteboard, birthday cards signed with flourishing affection. Now I wondered how many other things he had written that I had never seen. Love letters to Cynthia? Confessions of regret? Documentation of a double life I'd been too blind or too willing to ignore? As the afternoon light shifted to evening, I finally retrieved my wooden box from the suitcase and placed it next to the journal. 2 repositories of secrets, one containing mine, one containing his. The symmetry was almost poetic. With hands that trembled slightly, I opened my box first. There lay Frank's original wedding band, nestled in its velvet compartment. I removed it and placed it beside the duplicate I'd found in the chapel, identical in every detail, except for those damning initials inside. Next, I slid my fingernail along the edge of the secret compartment and removed the sealed envelope containing my letter to Frank, my confession that he'd never read. The paper had yellowed slightly over the years, but the seal remained intact. I set it aside, still unable to break that seal, even now. Finally, with a deep breath that did little to steady my nerves, I opened Frank's journal. The first few entries were mundane, notes about his research, complaints about university politics, observations about Eliza's development. I skimmed them, recognizing the everyday Frank I had known and loved. But as I turned the pages, the tone began to change. The entries became more personal, more confessional. June 14th, 1995. I saw CL again today. It's been 3 years since Charlotte, since we agreed to end things, but seeing her at the conference was like no time had passed. The same electricity, the same impossible choice. July 3rd, 1995. Margaret suspects nothing. How can she be so blind? Or perhaps she sees but chooses not to acknowledge. That would be very like her, maintaining the appearance of perfection at all costs. I flinched at these words, so casually cruel in their assessment of me. Had he really seen me that way? As someone so invested in appearances that I would willingly blind myself to his infidelity? The entries continued, documenting clandestine meetings, phone calls, his growing resentment toward me, and the life we'd built in Michigan. November 19, 1995. CL has accepted the position at Michigan State. She'll be less than an hour away. Margaret continues her community college teaching, oblivious to the fact that my late nights at the lab have nothing to do with research. January 8, 1996. The weight of living 2 lives is becoming unbearable. I look at Eliza and feel such guilt. She deserves better than a father who has built her life on lies. But how can I destroy everything now? There would be so much collateral damage. I read on, each entry driving the knife deeper. Frank, my Frank, had been living a double life for years. The man I thought I knew, the marriage I thought we had, the family I thought we'd built, all of it undermined by his ongoing relationship with Cynthia Layton. Then I reached the entries from March 2002, the month before Frank's death. The tone had shifted again, becoming more agitated, more desperate. March 10, 2002. M found the receipt from the hotel. Not the whole truth, but enough to raise questions I'm not prepared to answer. She's threatening to go to the university board. Everything would unravel. March 13, 2002. M is still investigating. found the second phone, demanded answers about the money transfers. I managed to convince her it was for Eliza's college fund, but she remained suspicious. March 15, 2002. The confrontation with M was worse than I anticipated. She knows more than I realized. Threatened to take Eliza, to expose everything to the board, to CL's husband. Said she had documentation. I've never seen her so cold, so calculated. My hands began to shake violently as memory collided with his written account. The receipt he mentioned. I had indeed found it, tucked into his jacket pocket while doing laundry. The unexplained charges to our joint account. The second phone discovered in his glove compartment. The heated argument that had followed. But his characterization of me was unrecognizable. Cold, calculated. I had been devastated, heartbroken, terrified of losing my family. Not the vengeful harpy he described. I turned the page, dreading what might come next, and found the final entry, dated April 2nd, 2002, the night Frank died. I've made the necessary arrangements. M will never know the full truth. The official story will protect Eliza from the worst of it. I've spoken with James. He'll ensure the financial aspects are handled discreetly. CL will receive what we agreed upon. As for M, she'll have the life insurance, the house, the appearance of the grieving widow she's so desperate to maintain. A fitting arrangement for a marriage built on mutual deception. I stared at the page, reading and rereading those final words. Mutual deception. What did he mean? What deception did he think I had perpetrated? The letter in the wooden box seemed to pulse with significance. My confession. The truth I'd been too afraid to tell him while he was alive. The secret I'd carried alone for our entire marriage. Had he somehow known? Had that been the subtext of our final argument? The one I'd revisited countless times in the years since his death? The motel room phone rang, startling me from my spiraling thoughts. I answered mechanically, still half lost in 2002. Mom? Eliza's voice, tight with emotion. It's me. We need to talk. My heart leaped to my throat. Eliza, how did you know where I was? Uncle James has been having you followed since you showed up at the hotel. No apology, no warmth, just cold efficiency. I'm at the Riverside Hotel with Cynthia Layton, room 237. Come now, alone. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat motionless, the phone still pressed to my ear, Frank's journal open on my lap, my own unread confession on the bedside table. Eliza was with Cynthia. They were waiting for me, waiting to confront me about what? What version of the past had they constructed? What role had they cast me in within this twisted family drama? I gathered Frank's journal, my wooden box with its secrets, and the duplicate ring. Whatever reckoning awaited me at the Riverside Hotel, I would face it armed with all the fragments of truth I possessed. As I drove through the darkening streets of Charlotte, a strange calm settled over me. For 20 years, I had lived in the shadow of Frank's death, never fully understanding what had happened that night, never questioning the official story of a sudden heart attack. Now, I was on the precipice of a truth that threatened to rewrite not just the past, but my entire identity. The woman who entered the Riverside Hotel was not the same one who had arrived in Charlotte 3 days earlier, desperate for her daughter's love. That woman had been defined by her roles: mother, widow, keeper of a perfect family facade. This woman, the one who now rode the elevator to the second floor, with a wooden box of secrets clutched to her chest, was defined only by her determination to face whatever truth awaited, no matter how devastating. What would you do if everything you believed about your family was suddenly called into question? Would you have the courage to face the truth, even if it meant unraveling the very fabric of your identity? Margaret's journey reminds us that sometimes the hardest doors to open are the ones we've locked ourselves. Doors to painful memories, uncomfortable truths, and the parts of ourselves we've hidden away. Family secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply we try to bury them. The walls we build to protect ourselves often become the very prisons that isolate us from those we love most. Margaret's story teaches us that real love isn't about maintaining perfect appearances or hiding our flaws. It's about having the courage to stand in our truth, however messy or imperfect it might be. Sometimes the greatest act of love is simply being willing to listen, to understand, and to forgive, not just others, but ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories of courage, redemption, and the complicated beauty of family relationships. Your support helps these important stories reach those who need to hear them most. Remember, behind every closed door is a story waiting to be told. And sometimes the most healing thing we can do is simply open that door and listen.